This interview is part of the James J. Blanchard Living Library of Michigan Political History. Peter B. Fletcher, it's a great pleasure to interview you for the Michigan Political History Society. I think you've described two different kinds of people who get involved in politics and government. What are those two categories?
Well, it's an oversimplification. I am certainly eager to confess to that. But generally speaking, there are people who want to seek and occupy public office. And they want to do this for a variety of reasons, some noble, some not so noble. Then there are those of us, I think more like myself, who want to help the right people get elected to the proper offices and then discharge those responsibilities in a very honest and forthright manner. And I have worked on many campaigns over the years. I have thoroughly enjoyed that. But because of my involvement in politics, I was rather dragged, rather reluctantly, into occupying 4 different constitutional offices of the state of Michigan. And then I was elected to one local office on a city charter commission. And all of these were very interesting experiences. And I think I learned a lot about human nature, which is, of course, the key to success. Understanding human nature, because it is the only unchanging thing in this universe. Study the Greek philosophers, the Roman philosophers, the German philosophers, English philosophers, French philosophers, all of them have a constant theme. Human nature is so predictable. Political science is not an oxymoron. Just understand politics, and the way you do is understand human nature.
Okay, so was the Charter Commission the only office you were ever elected to for the city of Ypsilanti?
Yes, yes.
Now, was that before you got involved?
No, that was after I had been involved in the state politics.
Okay, so you started out involving yourself in local elections,
yes,
like
city council,
school boards, stuff like that.
That's right, exactly.
Then what? You got involved with Governor Romney. We won't talk about Governor Romney necessarily.
Here's what happened originally. A very good friend of mine, J. Don Lawrence, a very prominent local attorney, was interested in running for the Constitutional Convention that we had in 1960. The election was in 64, I believe, around in there. And he wanted to run for delegate. He'd run for nothing else before, came to me, I managed his campaign, and we won very handily. So he goes to the Constitutional Convention. There's where we meet George Romney for the first time. We had known about him, understood his interest, and George Romney had been very successful in getting Michigan to amend its constitution so we could then finally have a state constitutional convention. Romney was elected, was one of the vice chairs, Steve Nesbitt, a wonderful choice for being chairman of it. And J. Don Lawrence was our delegate from Ypsilanti. So I would attend sessions. That's where I met President Eisenhower and President Truman, because they both spoke. And I got to meet them because J. Don took me down on the convention floor. And that's where I first met George Romney, and very impressive character. And so when he decided to run for governor, I signed on to his campaign strictly as a volunteer, and was recruited to some degree by Bob Teeter, who was very active in Republican politics back then.
A pollster.
Yes, very prominent.
Albion College professor.
Right. Very, very prominent. And we worked together very nicely, and we got George Romney elected governor.
1962.
That's right, and it worked out very well. And then from then on, I was involved in the Romney campaigns, each succeeding campaign. Then when he departed for Washington to be part of the Nixon administration as the Secretary of HUD, Bill Milliken becomes governor. But I had also worked with Governor Milliken when he was running for lieutenant governor. I was very active in that campaign. But once he becomes governor, I'm even more involved, because he needed some very quick additions to his his kitchen cabinet.
That was like 1969.
Right. Yep. And he was immediately faced with election in 1970.
Right.
And that was a very tough election, and he won by a very slim margin. But and by the way, the state constitution had been involved. The new constitution was involved. Had been adopted by a very slim margin, and we always claimed that Washington County provided that margin because it carried big
like 7,000 votes.
Oh yeah, it was big in Washington County. And so, of course, we always take credit for it.
Well, you should.
We don't deserve it.
You should. You should.
The politics is much about the myth of power.
Well, in that case, it's probably a valid claim on your part. Let me ask you this. Did George Romney appoint you to any state office or offices, or was that only Governor Bill Milliken?
Yes, Milliken appointed me to the Highway Commission.
Right.
He then appointed me to the board at Michigan State University. Right. Then James Blanchard is the one who appointed me to the State Officers Compensation Commission.
Right.
And John Engler, much to my chagrin, appointed me to the Michigan Judicial Tenure Commission, the worst 2 years of my life.
Well, we'll get to all those.
Oh, yes.
Let me ask you just one question about George Romney. Wasn't there some incident involving a bar mitzvah in a mental facility? What happened?
Here's what happened. George Romney was very good at doing 4th of July parades. He would get on a helicopter and hop around to about 5 or 6 different 4th of July parades, with Ypsilanti being the final one at 11 o'clock in the morning. He'd start out at 9 o'clock and downriver someplace and so on. But this one year, when we got to Ypsilanti, everything was all set, and we were going to have lunch at my dad's farms right west of town as soon as we was through with the parade. Well, as soon as we finished the parade, the state trooper pulled me aside. He said, "Peter, the governor wants to go out to the Ypsilanti State Hospital," which was right south of my dad's farm, about 4 or 5 miles. And I said, "Well, that's fine, whatever he wishes to do." But he says, "We've got to be very careful with security because there can be some hazards there. Would you be willing to go with us?" I said, "Of course." And so we went out, and it turned out that the reason the governor was going there is because some Jewish family that knew Romney through some connection, I think it was way back in American Motors days, their grandson was at an age, he was in the youth psychiatric unit there, so he could not leave the facility. So they were going to conduct his bar mitzvah there. And they asked the governor if he would be willing to participate, which he did readily. So we went out there, the bar mitzvah was all set, the governor walks in, and it was a most remarkable thing. Here was the governor of the state of Michigan participating in a Jewish bar mitzvah. He was, of course, very active in the Mormon church. Everybody knew that. But the governor gave a very, very compelling presentation on the bonds of similarity between Judaism, Christianity, the Mormon faith, all of it. It was very moving.
Wow.
The family was very touched, and it was. But nobody knew about it. One of the requirements was no press, nothing. And so I believe I'm one of the few people that was actually an eyewitness there who can still tell that story, and
Wow.
it's absolutely valid.
That is amazing. That is an amazing story. We'll get back to George Romney in a minute. Let me ask you, you get Governor Bill Milliken elected to a full 4-year
Yep.
term in 1970, and so he rewards you by appointing you to some state agency?
I would characterize it more as a punishment, because I had made it crystal clear. Well, I made it crystal clear I didn't want to occupy any public office.
Yeah.
But the State Highway Department and Commission had been through a terrible grand jury. Lots of problems. And Governor Milliken, for some reason, thought I was a rather radamanthine character. And he said, "I've got to get somebody in there who's going to not want to take bribes, not want to twist the rules, not want to cheat on anything."
And maybe ask some hard questions.
Right, and demand answers. And there were good aspects of the Highway Department, but they were so discouraged because of all the problems they'd been through. And so he appointed me to the State Highway Commission.
Now, was this about what, 72?
Yes, 1972.
72, okay.
And of course the Democrats were incensed. Oh yes, this was a payoff, and therefore they were going to block my confirmation. Well, as you recall, the Constitution required that they had to act in 60 session days. But there was an even split in the Michigan Senate.
Yeah.
It was split. So the Republicans just held back. They didn't
Right.
move up
Right.
So 60 days went by, and I was by default confirmed. So I loved going around the state telling people not a single vote was cast against my confirmation. And of course, not a single vote was cast for me.
Well, that's right. We don't mention the latter.
No, of course not. But I was a full-fledged commissioner.
So what did you find when you became a member of that body?
I found that the department was very severely scarred by that whole experience and eager to get back on the right track. And fortunately, when I arrived, it was almost coincidental with the hiring of John Woodford as the director. And John Woodford was an excellent, absolutely excellent director. It was one of my proudest accomplishments, was seeing that John was the director, and I supported him completely, and he supported us. And John often said afterwards, he said, "Fletcher was a tough boss, but he was absolutely straight arrow. There was no, and he would really get after us. He'd put the pressure on us. But when he went over to the legislature to testify, when he spoke at public meetings about the highway department, he was a big proponent, He explained to people why we had to become a transportation department, not a highway department. So we had to be interested in public transportation. We had to be interested in all the forms of transportation, whether it was aircraft, whether it was boats, everything. And John and I thought we made a pretty good team.
How many people were on the commission at that
Four.
time?
There were two Democrats, two Republicans.
Do you remember some of the other members?
Yes.
And their reaction?
Ben Erickson was there when I was, well, Charlie Hewitt was the chairman at the time, and he was, of course, was an ardent Democrat. And so he was a little suspicious, but before it was over, Charlie and I got along just fine. And when I was first appointed, Tom Shaver, who had worked for the Free Press and followed me in politics and was the director of the PR for the highway department, came to me, oh, Peter, now we don't want to have anything in politics, You got to be careful, I know you're a big partisan. I said, well, I'll make you a deal, Tom, I'll make you a deal. You watch me for the next year. You come back in a year from now and tell me if I've been inappropriate in my politics. Okay. He never came back to me because I knew that politics had nothing to do with whether or not you were going to have a great department.
Right.
And we were there to serve the people and the public interest and to make certain that every dollar we collected from the taxpayers was spent prudently. And I found all kinds of ways to save money and focus it directly on solving problems of transportation.
How long were you on the commission?
6 years.
6 years altogether.
But the day I was appointed, I handed the governor my signed, undated resignation. Governor, if you find anyone in this Pacific Commonwealth you would rather have fulfill this odious task, please make me the happiest person around and just put the date on it and I'm gone.
End my misery.
Right.
All right, but actually, I think you secretly got something out of it.
I was, well, but it was, I don't know, every 2 weeks to have to trudge off to Lansing. And,
Is that how often they met? Twice a month?
Yes, but guess what? When I became chairman, we cut it to once a month, and the meetings were 2 hours. I mean, there's none of this falderall. Boom, 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 boom. Come on, folks. Give us the information. We make the decision. Get it to us in advance so we can think it over. And there were more efficient ways of doing virtually everything in state government. You know, that bureaucracy about to drive you nuts. The two worst things about state government was civil service, because it protected the incompetent and the indifferent and the indolent. I couldn't fire anybody.
Right.
And I mean, we caught a guy stealing money from us at the Blue Water Bridge. Oh, no, we had to put him on some sort of leave. The only one we could finally fire was a guy that was caught sneaking around the women's restrooms, harassing women. Now, that one we could finally get rid of, but it was a tough challenge.
Well, was it you or the commission that could fire or not these people, or was it John Woodford?
Well, Woodford was, of course, the day-to-day administrator, so he had the ultimate responsibility.
Right.
But the final policy decisions were made by the commission.
Wasn't there a famous map that came out while you were on the commission?
Well, I was accused by Keith Bolin, who was then the director of the Department of Labor, I think it was, an ardent U of M guy.
Right.
He said, Fletcher, you're not being faithful to the University of Michigan because you're allowing them to repaint the Mackinac Bridge under your ken and purview green and white, the colors of the arch enemy in East Lansing. Well, I had no control over that because the Federal Highway Administration determined that green and white were the safety colors. They used them all over the country.
Right.
I said, well, I'll do something that proves I'm as faithful to the maize and blues as anyone else. We were getting ready to put out the new state highway map. So I called in Tom Shaver, who was in charge of the map project. I said, Tom, here's what we're going to do. In the Ohio section of the map, for which we have no legal liability, we're going to put two new towns. One of them is going to say Go Blue, G-O-B-L-U. The other one is going to say Beat O-S-U, B-E-A-T-O-S-U. But we're telling nobody.
It was like kind of rural Toledo.
Yeah, right. Just south of the border, in that cultural wasteland called O-H-I-O, four-letter word. And so we told nobody. Introduced the new map, and well, fine. It was the year RenCen opened in downtown Detroit, so that's where we introduced the map. And at the conclusion of the press conference, I said, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, there's something on the new map which is not on the old map. That's all I said. Well, some smarty went home that night, put the two maps up to a bright light, and found my errant towns. William, I'm here to tell you that my life has not been the same. What I thought would be a modest amusement of about a 20-minute duration has taken on a life of its own. To this day, 30 years later, not a month goes by but doesn't come about that silly map caper. Unbelievable.
It was a great incident. I mean, it was front page news all over the state.
When I went on the MSU board, they wanted to know what I was going to do with the MSU campus map. I said, nothing. I mean,
how long was it just that 1 year?
Yes, because the minute I left the commission, the cartographer jerked it off because it felt so violated. It wasn't accurate. It was not an accurate
You
thing.
didn't really get in trouble over that, did you?
No, but the governor got about 6 letters of complaint from people.
Only 6?
About six letters. He said, Peter, what should I do to answer answer this? I said, well, here's a suggested answer, Governor. Why don't you answer them and say, Mr. Fletcher serves without any compensation. He's entitled to $60,000 a year from the public treasury. He pays all of his own expenses, even though he's entitled to complete reimbursement. And therefore, in exchange for that, he spent about $6 in extra ink on that map. And therefore, I believe that the people have come out ahead financially. Guess what? No more complaints.
Okay, let me ask you this. 6 years pass, the commission term to which you were appointed ends.
Yep.
And what?
Well, no, it didn't end. I'd been reappointed once, so I still had another couple of years to go.
Okay.
But I said, Governor, we've now gotten you reelected, and I want out. I need my peace and quiet at a
You wanted freedom.
And a respite, yes.
Freedom at last.
Yes, please.
And he said,
please,
okay, but then did he
Very
immediately demand that you take something else?
No. Here's what happened.
You a hiatus?
No. Here's what happened. I handed a resignation. As soon as we were elected election night, I handed in my resignation. The governor, you've got to give me my freedom. Oh, please. No, I said. So reluctantly, he accepted my resignation. Okay, 2 years go by. One day, out of the clear blue sky, they'd had a resignation. They'd forced a person off of the MSU Board of Trustees because there had been all kinds of scandals. He was cheating and everything. It was bad. He was in jail for non-support, the whole thing. Okay, so here's this vacancy. There hadn't been a vacancy on the board at MSU in years. And the MSU board is an elected board. So the governor very seldom would make an appointment anyway. There hadn't been an appointment in modern history. Well, as soon as this guy resigned, 200 people immediately applied. Oh, begging, pleading, whining. All these bleed green types.
Sure.
Well, all of a sudden, they're sitting around the office one day, according to Joyce Braithwaite, who was the appointments person.
Right.
And suddenly the governor says, wait a minute, I knew who I'm going to appoint. She thought he was going to name one of these 5 or 6 names they were down to. I'm going to appoint Peter Fletcher. Peter Fletcher? He doesn't even want it. He's never even been on the campus. I'm appointing Peter Fletcher. I'm going to prove to the people of Michigan that you get a better quality by appointment than you do by election. And Fletcher will be so... he'll be absolutely, he won't take anything from them. And
he was convinced that you would be dispassionate, objective.
Right, exactly.
And you would do the same kind of job you did on the Highway Commission.
Exactly.
But did he realize there might be a big backlash?
Oh boy, was there a backlash. Because when he called me and said, well, Peter, I'm going to appoint you the trustee of Michigan State University, I said, Governor, you realize you're talking to Peter Fletcher in Ypsilanti? Yes. And this is the governor of the state of Michigan? Yes. I said, Governor, do you realize how controversial this will be? He said, I found that some of my most controversial appointments are some of my most successful. But Governor, I don't wish to be a trustee of Michigan State University. Peter, I have done things for you I didn't wish to do. Now it's your turn to do this for me. So there I was, stuck.
Well, you were stuck.
And when he announced it, for 3 days, absolute hell broke loose.
Well, you are kind of downplaying the fact that you're a famous maize and blue guy.
I agreed, but the third day, guess who called me?
Who?
John, the president, long-time president.
John Hanna?
John Hanna called me.
John Hanna?
And he said, Mr. Fletcher,
yes.
If Governor Milliken thinks you will be a good trustee of Michigan State, that's good enough for me. With that, the thing all quieted down. I showed up at the first meeting,
was it,
wearing my green and white tie and everything.
Wow.
And on my car, I arranged with this, I got a personalized plate.
Right.
On my car was my M Go Blue sticker on the window, and the license plate said MSUTOO. So I had a dual allegiance. A dual allegiance.
That is very good. Now,
and after I left, 4.5 years later, I often said a wide body of opinion held I was the finest trustee they ever had. Of course, it was my wide body, but so what?
How long were you on the board?
4.5 years.
4.5 years. You never actually ran, did you?
No.
You just served out.
I served out the term.
Balance of the term.
Right, but balance of the term, and I left them in sort of a question. And I said, well, I will respond to the wishes of the people of the state of Michigan.
Yeah.
And guess what? Not one person asked me to seek re-election, including myself. So I understood that I was the visiting leper.
John Hanna, he was emeritus president
Yes, but still the patron
saint. Was Wharton the president? Who was the president?
No, they were just in the process of changing. Well, they were just in the process of changing presidents.
Yeah.
And they hired...
Wharton had just left?
Yes, and they hired John DiBiagio.
Okay.
And John DiBiagio came... No, it was Cecil Mackey.
Harden?
Cecil Mackey. No,
Cecil Mackey was there. Okay.
Cecil Mackey was there, and Cecil was having a tough time. Cecil had all of the qualifications for being an excellent university president except one. He had no political instincts. It was very sad, because Cecil was an excellent president otherwise. And I tried my best to protect him from some of his political blunders, but boy, oh boy, it was tough. It was very tough.
He's still there. Today.
Yes, he's an emeritus
still teaching.
professor.
He's an emeritus professor. His wife's still very active in the community.
I agree. Fine people, but oh boy, it was one of those sad circumstances of where He'd worked for Estes Kefauver and everything. I mean,
Right.
and Estes Kefauver was a great politician, but for some reason Cecil just never quite got
Maybe it
that.
was cultural.
Who
He
knows?
was from Alabama.
Yeah, but who knows? It was very sad.
What else did you find out as a Michigan State University trustee?
MSU, Michigan State University, is a fine and remarkable institution, a great asset for this state and for Midwestern America. And I was very pleased to be able to speak on behalf of a number of but their priorities were so distorted on the Board of Trustees. For example, they badly needed a $50,000 appropriation to buy a microscope for two of the top cancer research people in the country that were right there at Michigan State. Well, they had a terrible time finding that, but they could find $175,000 paying hush money when George Perlis got into all that mess when he left the Philadelphia Stars, whatever it was, to come back to Michigan State.
Now, you were on the board when that happened?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Well,
and
what about all that?
I kept saying, wait a minute. He's got a contract. He's breaking a contract, and they say they're going to sue us. And what about? Oh, no, don't worry. So they hire him. And sure enough, the day after Christmas, we get served with a $1 million lawsuit.
Right.
I said, what about? Oh, don't worry. It's all going to go away. So about 2 weeks later, I get a call from someone in the press. I said, well, Mr. Fletcher, what do you think about this settlement the university's made at paying $175,000 in hush money and $20,000 in legal fees? I said, nobody told me anything about this. What? So I called Cecil Mackey. I said, Cecil, what's going on? Oh, I want to come down and talk to you. So he comes down and tried to placate me. Well, yes, we made this secret deal, and the federal judge issued a gag order. We can't talk about it. Well, I said, you better tell that federal judge to hurry out to Ypsilanti and bring his piano wire, because he's going to wire my jaw shut. I have no intention of not accounting for every penny of the public's money here at Michigan State. And with that, the next day, I blew it off. And, oh, my word, I said, there is no such thing as a pigskin messiah. I refuse to worship at the cheap and tawdry shrine built to the gods of greater glitter and glory. There are more important things to this university than the peculiar prancings after a pigskin on a Saturday afternoon. And
okay. Well, now, is the University of Michigan situation with Rich Rodriguez and the University of West Virginia any better of situation than the Perlis and Philadelphia Stars situation?
Here's the problem. Cecil Mackey and I both sat around his office many times, and Cecil said there is no such thing as a clean program in athletics, in the big time athletics. Now, money, TV, the money is just unbelievable. But I must say that I am a very dear, longtime friend and huge admirer of Bill Martin. Bill Martin came
Who's the athletic director?
Yes, at the University of Michigan.
For the University of Michigan.
He came into a really messed up program. He's cleaned it up. He is a straight arrow. And whatever complications they may have at the University of Michigan or in the Michigan Athletic Department are not of his origin or doing. And he will clean it up if that's what it requires. Therefore, I'm a big fan of Bill Martin.
Well, but on the other hand, I must say, the Rich Rodriguez thing all happened on Bill Martin's watch, long after he became athletic
yes,
director.
but remember, Bill Martin cannot be everywhere at everything. Bill Martin juggles many, many responsibilities, and he does them all very well. Plus, I will be the first to confess he's done me many personal kindnesses, and therefore I am prejudiced. But I have a lot of faith in Bill Martin. Bill Martin leads our bank, which is very successful, and that's all Bill Martin's doing.
All right. Okay, so what else happened at that time? Were you still there when they tried to make Perlis athletic director?
No, that was after my time. That was after my time.
That was long.
That was
long
after my time. And now, of course, he's a trustee of Michigan State. I mean, the people in their infinite wisdom have ignored my warnings. But my warnings have been ignored before.
So
remember, the year after I left the Highway Department, they got right back into another grand jury thing. A contract I would not approve, they snuck through the month after I left. And therefore, I don't like to be I told you so type, but I can't help myself.
Okay. Now, were you out of office by the end of 1982 when Governor Milliken left the governorship?
No. I was overlapped
slightly
Blanchard.
into Blanchard's term.
Yes.
So you go off the MSU board of your own volition, as you say. How many years passed before Governor Blanchard, a Democrat, summoned you to public duty? 2
or 4 years. We have this peculiar institution called the State Officers Compensation Commission, which is unnecessary and a bad dodge of legislative responsibility, trying to set the governor's salaries, the judges' salaries, the legislative salaries. And so they needed a Republican. And Gary Owen he said, well, I've got this Republican.
Who was the Speaker of the House, a Democrat who was from Ypsilanti, who you knew well.
And we worked together very well.
Right.
And Gary says, well, I've got this guy at Ypsilanti, and Blanchard knew me somewhat. And he said, why don't we appoint Fletcher? Oh, okay. So I reluctantly, okay, here again. and go up, because this is a useless commission performing an idiotic responsibility that shouldn't be ours and insulated from the public. It just makes no sense. I want complete disclosure of everything. When I was on the Highway Commission, there were no executive sessions, no conference telephone calls, nothing. The door was physically blocked open to every commission meeting. There were, I mean, sorry, I want it absolutely open.
By the way, at Michigan State Board, just to sidebar for a second here, was there secrecy there, or was it as open as you would have liked it?
Not when I was there wasn't any secrecy. They tried to have some of those, and it didn't work. And the final, they had a secret meeting when they were hiring DiBiagio after Cecil left, and they ended up a secret meeting.
Were you still there?
Yes, I was still there. And they said, oh, and they said, so they had this secret meeting. Therefore, about a
secret meeting without you?
Yeah, exactly. They didn't tell me about it.
You mean some members of the board had a secret meeting?
No, they convened a secret meeting without me to finish up this deal with the presidency.
Because they were afraid you'd blow the whistle.
Right. So this was about 2 months before the end of my term anyway, and I said, I'm done, through, I'm out. I'm not going to be part of this. And I left. So they had no farewell for me. Imagine that.
Did you? So you actually resigned physically before the end of your term?
I submitted to the Governor Blanchard. I said, I will not be part
of
of
this. What did you think of the hiring of DiBiagio, by the way?
Well,
I mean,
DiBiagio,
beyond the messiness of the process.
No, but DiBiagio was okay. He was okay.
Yeah. But he had a hard time too.
Oh, of course, because he had an impossible board. These elected boards for university, I mean, Michigan is one of the half a dozen states or so where they elect directly. An idiotic system.
We're the only state that elects our three major higher education board and our state board of education statewide.
And it's electoral Russian roulette.
I mean, it's really bad.
Dreadful. It's dreadful.
Did you think the board members were really not up to snuff, most of them?
The whole problem was they were far more interested in what they were going to get out of it. See, pay was forbidden, but you could get actual expenses reimbursed. Well, they wanted free football tickets. They wanted free rides on the planes to any bowl games. They wanted free everything. Free. They got down to they were arguing over getting a free library card. Wait a minute. I said, folks, what's wrong with just taking the sense that you performed a duty faithfully on behalf of the public? That's all the compensation I want. But oh no, they wanted all these perks. I wouldn't take one of them.
All right, well, when you finally get appointed...
They had cars that were assigned to them, everything.
They had cars?
Oh, yeah.
Really? As trustees?
Crazy.
But you turned it down?
Nope, wouldn't take a thing.
Okay, but you finally get appointed to a board is a good one. Was the state officer's compensation? I mean, they hardly ever meet, right?
Well, that was
a
great plus.
They just meet like once every 2 years. That was a big plus.
And I'll tell you, though, what satisfaction I got from that. Soapy Williams was the Chief Justice. He was just finishing up. So his last day in public office was December the 31 some year, and he came over to speak on behalf of judicial salaries. And as he finished up, I said, just a moment, ladies and gentlemen, Governor Williams, Chief Justice Williams, and I are on opposite sides of the political fence, but I would be remiss in my duties as a public official if I were not to stop and put on the record of this commission. This is the final public appearance, the final public responsibility that this distinguished citizen of Michigan is performing. And I want the record to show that we all applaud his service to the people of the state of Michigan. You may not agree with his policy decisions, but you could not disagree with his motives in serving all of the people of Michigan. And I want to thank him on behalf of our 6 million citizens.
Wow. And that was his last public appearance, really.
And I got a very nice letter from Soapy afterwards. He said, Peter, that was very kind, and he certainly didn't have to do it, but I said I felt compelled to, Governor.
Well, that's good. So he, in other words, he was arguing on behalf of hiking judicial pay.
Of course, because we were having judges that were having to borrow from payday to payday and that kind of stuff.
What did you think, generally speaking, as a member of that commission, even though you felt it was an unnecessary administrative and executive appendage that shouldn't even exist, did you feel that their mission in looking at pay for public officials was valid in the sense somebody had to do it, and
as long as we were stuck with the responsibility, let's do the best job we can.
Did you feel that public officials, most of them, were underpaid and that they should have at least cost of living increases every 2 years, which is basically what the commission
But I believe that public officials should be paid appropriate salaries commensurate with the private sector so that we could recruit the best and brightest to seek public office. We shouldn't restrict public office to those who only can afford it through their private means. But by the same token, we should then be more responsible in who we put in those offices.
So did you get a backlash from the public and the news media every time you made these recommendations, and then the legislature at that time could allow them to just take effect without even voting on it? And there was a lot of controversy
right, but
from time to time.
We never heard from anyone.
You never did?
No, because I made them institute public hearings around the state on what we were doing. Nobody showed up.
Nobody.
No, but at least we could say, if you've got a complaint, where were you?
Which years was it? Like 86, 88? Was it like about the time George H.W. Bush was elected president? Around that time,
I think 88? I have a vague.
But there wasn't that much hue and cry or backlash or negative reaction.
They would grouse about it in their local meetings or something like that. But we never heard a thing.
Now they later, as you may know, amended the statute and the Constitution to say there has to be a vote.
Yeah,
it has to be a vote by the legislature on the recommendations of the commission. But you don't have any problem with that, do you?
No. But still, who pays attention?
Well, they probably, in other words, it gives the legislators, less cover than they used to have because they have to vote now.
But Bill, you and I both know that one of the huge defects in American government is the colossal neglect the voters lavish upon it.
Right.
Well, I mean, nobody in the state of Michigan, you included, can name all of our statewide elected officials.
Because
we elect
7,000.
Yeah, we elect too many. We elect too many.
My God, we got over 5,000 township
It's crazy.
offices.
No. Just take the statewide offices.
Just take state.
Like those boards and commissions.
Okay. I probably could do that. You and I maybe are the only two. But anyway.
But very few. Very few.
So how long were you on the state officers' compensation?
4 years. And that's a term limited, thank goodness.
Okay. So when you got off, then Governor Blanchard was defeated by John Engler in 1990. John Engler comes in.
Yes.
How long were you free before he glommed
I knew
on
John Engler from way back when he was in the state legislature.
Right.
John and I had gotten along just fine.
Yeah.
And the minute he became governor, I said, now, remember, Governor, I don't wish to be appointed to anything. Oh, yes. And every time I would see him, remember, Governor, there are a lot of people clawing at you, wanting to be appointed to something. I'm not one of those. Oh, I understand. Fine. Year 2000, February 2000, I get a call from Governor Engler. Said, Peter, I'm going to appoint you to the Michigan Judicial Tenure Commission. I said, Governor, remember, this is Peter Fletcher of Ypsilanti. You promised me faithfully you would appoint me to nothing. But he said, Peter, I'm desperate. You're the only person I know in the state of Michigan who's not intimidated by judges or attorneys, and that's what I need on that commission. Well, I said, I can't argue with that, but who am I intimidated by? He said, I'm hoping on this one occasion you're intimidated by your governor. I said, okay, all right, but remember, you're getting the signed undated resignation, like every other governor.
Yeah, well, I'm sure he loved that.
I understand. But so I go on the JTC. The worst 2 years of my life, because what we let judges get away with in this state is an absolute disgrace. The first meeting I attended, they're having this hearing relating to a governor in downriver Michigan here who's had 5 sexual harassment complaints filed about from his own staff. He wastes his time playing darts in the back of the room when he's supposed to be conducting court. He's going around to these titty bars in an unmarked car so the police won't harass him and so on. I mean, he was abusing the public trust beyond anything even remotely reasonable. And they were, I said, throw him off. Throw him off.
Were you the only public member of the
No, there were 2 public members.
There were 2 public members. Do you have any help from the other public member?
Nope. They're all intimidated because there were 5 judges. There were 5 judges and the 2 attorneys sitting there.
Okay.
Well, I wasn't intimidated. Well, at any rate, throw him off. No. 3 years later, 3 years after I've departed, they finally had to throw him off. And they said, Peter, why didn't we listen to you? Well, I've heard that before. And then we had this attorney member who was busy auctioning off his service on the JTC in front of judges. Well, remember, I'm a member of the JTC. He would say that right in open court. And he made a deal with one judge. That one judge we apprehended in the men's room in an illegal activity in the Metro Airport. And so Henry had I shouldn't give any names, but he went to the judge and he said,
Henry's the attorney.
Yeah. He goes to this judge and he said, I've got this big divorce case in front of you, and I want a $500,000 fee out of that. If you give me that $500,000 fee, I'll see to it the JTC goes easy on you, which is exactly what happened. And guess what? The other side found out and raised so much cane that the next time around, Henry was not reelected to the JTC by the state bar. It was so bad. But what do you suppose happened a year later?
What?
Granholm reappoints him to the board of the Oakland Community College. I mean, folks,
Holy Toledo,
I mean,
really.
come on. Money, money,
Yeah.
money, 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 money.
The
money.
members of the JTC became members in what way? I mean, you were appointed by
Five were
Engler.
appointed, but see, there were the various trial courts elect
Right.
one of their members.
Right.
Then there are two appointed by two elected by the state bar, and then two appointed by the governor.
I got you. Okay.
So we were at an automatic disadvantage. Anything like that to discipline any public official should have a majority of public members. They should not have a stacked deck against them.
How long did you serve on that?
Just 2
dreadful
years.
2 years. How often did you have to meet?
Once a month.
And so you had to travel from Ypsilanti up there?
No, Detroit. We met in Detroit.
In Detroit?
Yep, because that's where most of the activity was.
Okay. And did you get per diem expenses, and that's it? There wasn't
I didn't
really
get anything. I don't. I think you were supposed to be paid expenses, but I didn't file for any expenses. And I made them, for the first time, I made them publish a budget. Now, sure, it wasn't a big budget, but I said, look, we're spending public money here. Why aren't we telling the public about it? Oh, they never thought of that.
What about Engler? What was it? Did you must have communicated with the governor at some point saying, Governor, you just don't realize how bad this particular commission is, the situation.
I tried to communicate with everybody, but
it just, there wasn't any
Well,
reaction.
it wasn't
Were there any other new members that were appointed while you were a member that made things any better?
Nope.
Not any better.
Nope. Now,
Wow.
I will say good things on behalf of Bill Murphy, who's on the State Court of Appeals. He
Right.
became the chairman shortly after, and he was very sympathetic and everybody. He said, Peter, I understand your frustrations. I know what this means to you and everything, but he said, we're up against a huge, tough block of influence. And the judges are, I mean, we put on that black robe and we get that gavel out there, and boy, oh boy.
Let me ask you this. Do you think the fact that judges are elected makes the situation you found yourself in as a member of the commission harder, tougher, or?
Yes, way back in my constitutional convention days with J. Don Lawrence, he tried his best to get a modified Missouri plan here in Michigan, but there were too many attorneys there and they just wouldn't go for it. And we really, that's what we need.
They didn't want an appointed judiciary. They wanted an elected judiciary.
Yep, because then they can have more direct impact. Every time there's a campaign, who's giving money to whom?
Turning to your political career, you were a Republican National Committeeman for the state of Michigan for how many years?
I was there for about 5 years. I filled out a term for Creighton Holden. So I came in just about the time that Nixon was in the mess, and then Gerald Ford becomes president. I'm the national committeeman at the convention in '76 out in Kansas City. And that's where we planted the seed to bring the convention, the first time ever a national political convention comes to Detroit in 1980.
Right.
And that's where Reagan and Bush, the first, are nominated president and vice president. Right.
Absolutely.
And it was also the beginning of the Tim McBride from Michigan becoming the personal aide to the President of the United States.
Right.
And then his wife today is the deputy to the President and chief of staff to Laura Bush, all with the Michigan connection because of that convention.
Wow, and that Kansas City convention.
Yep.
Well, and you were very much involved at that convention in the nose counting on delegates for the nomination, weren't
Absolutely.
you? Reagan, Ford?
Absolutely. Well,
what happened there?
1976, where the Reagan and Ford had these continuing battles all through the primaries, and there was a Michigan primary, and they sent Secretary Austin sent the letter, the notification to the big shots in Washington, and they fortunately forwarded me a copy, and they didn't realize that in Michigan you had to file an affidavit of candidacy no matter
the
who you were.
Ford campaign.
Right. He's the president. He's automatic now. I said, no, he's not.
Yeah.
Oh no, yes. So I called Austin's office. I said, is Gerald Ford going to be on the ballot? No, he hasn't filed an affidavit of candidacy. So I called the Washington Big Shots. I said, would you please check with your...
How far away was the deadline?
About 48 hours. And so I'm begging them. I said, he's not going to be on the ballot here. Oh, and so they checked. They called back in absolute panic. Oh my God, you're right. You go out to Metro Airport tonight, and there'll be a special envelope from Northwest Airlines flight so and so with his affidavit of candidacy. Okay, fine. So I got there. I spent 5 hours there. They searched the runways. They couldn't find it. They called the president of Northwest Airlines. Where is this envelope for the president? Nope. So I called the next morning. I said, is Gerald Ford still interested in being president? Blah, 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 blah. What do you mean? I said, I didn't get the affidavit of candidacy. What? You go out back there this afternoon at 3 o'clock. They got another whole set of it. So I go back out 3 o'clock that afternoon, wander around the balls, because I'm supposed to this particular office. So I finally find this way back in the back.
You're doing this all on your own, for
Of
God's
course.
sakes?
Yeah.
Well, what the heck is the matter with these people?
I know it.
It's unbelievable.
Remember, against stupidity, even the gods labor in vain. But so I finally find this guy in this back office. His desk is piled high with junk. And I said, do you have this envelope? Oh, he said, that sounds familiar. And he was shuffling around. I stood there thinking, are all great moments in politics like this? I mean, this is such idiocy. Yeah. Finally found, oh, yes, here it is. Jump in the car, race to Lansing, rush into the governor's office, hand him the envelope. He walks over to Austin's office, files with a 2-hour spare. It was that close. He goes on to win the Michigan primary, gets 59 delegates. He wins in Kansas City by 50 votes. Am I the reason that Gerald Ford was the candidate?
There you go.
I don't know.
Again.
I don't know. I don't know.
Well, let me ask this too. Didn't Ford also do a whistle stop tour?
Oh, he sure did.
Remember that?
That was Jerry Rowe.
Jerry
Rowe came
Rowe.
up with that. It was wonderful.
Yeah, a great idea. Were you on the train?
Yep, sure was.
Yep.
Sure was. A lot of fun.
That was a big success.
A lot of fun.
That helped him. Once he got on the ballot, maybe that was instrumental to his getting a nomination. So this was all for the presidential primary.
That's right.
Which in those days was much later than it is now. Wasn't it like in May?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
May 20th, I think it was.
So you're in Kansas City, and you got a really close vote. Even though, Ford won the Michigan primary, Reagan then won a lot of later primaries, as you know, down south. So what actually went on to lead to finally Ford winning it?
I believe that in Kansas City, there was just enough. Reagan was looked at as still a little bit of an outsider, a little bit, and if you in effect toss out an incumbent, what does that say about your chances? Doesn't that really mix things up for November?
Well, wasn't there a big deal, although, with Reagan picking Richard Schweikert, the U.S. Senator from Pennsylvania, as his running mate? Announcing it beforehand, trying to pry the Pennsylvania delegation loose from Ford. And I think there were some Michigan people involved in trying to hold that Pennsylvania delegation for Ford.
And it was tough. It was very tough. But one of the things that helped us is that when we had campaigned to get we were campaigning, to get the convention to Detroit, and we did a little trading on that too.
So you were already lobbying and working toward getting the convention in 1980.
Sure.
Beginning right there.
Sure.
Okay. Working for those 3 or 4 years up to 1980, what really clinched the deal getting the convention for Detroit?
We said Michigan is going to be a battleground state.
Right.
And even Coleman Young, the hardcore Democratic mayor of Detroit, will kind of quiet down if we go to Detroit.
Right.
And that's what sold it.
That's it. What about Odie Fish from Wisconsin? Do you remember him?
Yes, I sure do.
Big cigar smoker?
Yep.
I heard they took him over to Windsor and got him a lot of Cuban cigars that he couldn't have gotten otherwise.
There were a whole lot.
Wasn't he chairman of the site selection committee?
Exactly.
I think maybe that was...
Plus, I'll tell you the other thing we did.
Yeah.
When we brought the site selection committee here, the preliminary visits, we took them to every upscale. We took them to the Edsel and Eleanor Ford estate. I mean, we showed them elegance. They were really impressed because they kept thinking of Detroit as the Motor City. What they didn't realize is the Motor City had made a heck of a lot of money off those motors all these years, and there was a lot of wealth. And we showed them all of that.
So did you feel that Michigan really came through when it had its convention here? I mean, the National Republicans were really pleased.
They thanked us profusely. They really did. They were impressed.
Yeah.
And but I'll tell you who else helped us was Windsor. Windsor knocked themselves out to help and it was the only convention where delegates were put in two countries. America and a foreign country.
Right.
Only one. They love that.
That's true.
And Windsor, boy, they made it so easy. They waived all of the usual border things and everything. And those buses, if there was a convention bus, man, it went through the bridge and the tunnel right off.
Okay. Peter Fletcher, you were national committeeman for the Republican Party for 5 years. Were you always a Republican? Was your family Republican? How long were you a Republican? Tell us the story.
My father was an FDR Democrat. My mother was a Wisconsin socialist. So in order to be a rebellious youth, I decided I'd be a Republican. And my great aunt from Coldwater, Edith Phelps, a contemporary of Bob Teeter, pinned a Fitzgerald for governor pin on me in 1938.
Frank Fitzgerald,
Yeah,
the Republican.
And I was very intrigued. What is that all about? And that kind of got me started in following politics at a very young age.
Did you meet Frank Fitzgerald?
Oh, yes. Oh,
How
yes.
many governors have you met?
I have met every governor that was governor during my 76 years here on this earth.
Wow.
And I've met 7 different presidents.
Okay.
And I don't think there are too many people who have done that. And I found it very interesting.
Who was the earliest governor of Michigan you met?
It would have been Wilbur Brucker. He
Wilbur
was
Brucker.
governor, right? He was
31
governor.
and 32.
Yep.
Now, of course, you were barely alive or not even alive at that time. You must have met
I
him
was
much
born
later.
oh, yes, much later. I was born on February the 29th, 1932.
Oh, that's right.
Day that will go
So
down
you
in
only,
infamy
actually, you're
also.
much younger than I thought, right?
Oh, well, 19 birthdays. You know,
Exactly. You're only 19 years old.
Right, exactly. It's
A
wonderful.
leap year baby. But Wilbur Brucker was Secretary of the Army, I believe, in the
Right.
Eisenhower
Yes,
administration.
and that's
so
where I
it's
met him.
probably
That's where I met
under
him.
those
Yep,
circumstances.
yep. But for example, Pat Van Wagner in 1940,
Right.
he was on the Mackinac Bridge Authority board. That's
Right.
where I met him.
Right.
So there were various
How about
reasons.
Frank Murphy? Did you meet Frank Murphy?
Yep, because guess what? My great aunt and uncle, Donald and Jerry Bacon, were his campaign managers in 1934 and 35.
kidding.
So later on, I met him through that connection.
Wow, what a story.
Oh, yeah.
Comstock?
Comstock, same. There was the same thing. There was something. Jerry Rowe was. He was always interested in former governors and everything,
Right.
and he would have various get-togethers.
Yeah.
And there was some get-together that Jerry engineered, and that's how I met him.
And Williams Comstock was there. He was alive.
I think.
He was the governor in 33, 34.
That's right.
2-year
That's
term.
right. That's right.
Okay, so what about Harry Kelly?
Oh, Harry Kelly. I knew him quite well. Don't you remember the polio voting to vote?
Yeah.
And they mixed up the vote on the polio. I mean, on the margarine vote and the Harry Kelly vote in that election.
Yeah.
And that was a big fuss.
Yes,
big
that
fuss.
was 1950. I think,
Yeah,
wasn't it?
yeah.
When he came back and tried to beat Soapy.
Right.
And so how about Kim Sigler? Did you meet Kim
Oh,
Sigler?
did I ever? And Kim Sigler was right out of central casting. He looked like a governor
Right,
should
he
look.
looked like a governor,
He
yeah.
was tough. I was a big fan of Kim.
Immaculate suits.
Oh my gosh!
And he flew
his own,
airplanes.
flew his own plane and everything.
Right.
Oh, he was something
He
else.
was something else. And Soapy, of course, you know
Well, he married a girl from Ypsilanti.
That's right.
Right. So
Nancy
I can
Quick-
show you. It was
Quirk.
right down the street. Here's
Yep,
where he was married.
Right. That's right.
And so I would see the governor's car parked out in front of the Quirk home
Right.
here in Ypsilanti. Oh, fairly often.
I'll be darned.
But Soapy was I could have disagreed with Soapy on a lot of things, but he was certainly dedicated to the public interest. He really was.
And John Swainson, I'm sure you saw many
Oh,
times.
John
Yeah.
Swainson. And
Yeah.
I'll tell you, the reason I'm a big fan of John Swainson, he got himself into a lot of trouble, but after he served as governor, I knew of at least a half a dozen occasions where he visited people at the University of Michigan Hospital, especially kids who had an accident or something, had legs gone.
Right.
And he would walk into that room and he'd say, "Kid, you think your world is over. You think your life is done. Watch." He would drop his pants and show that he didn't have any legs either. And he'd say, "I became governor of the state of Michigan. You can do anything you want to." And the doctors would thank him profusely.
Sure.
"Governor, you have just done things for that kid that no doctor could ever do."
Right. Absolutely.
He was wonderful about that kind of thing.
That is
I was a big fan of John.
right. That's really something. So you've got George Romney coming into office, defeated John Swainson in a pretty close election in 1962. And you got to meet George Romney, as you mentioned, at the Con.
Right.
What was your... Go ahead.
But then I was also involved, beginning the spring of '69, Romney started his sort of pre-presidential. He was being conjectured, the next time around. And I traveled with him for 13 weeks as chief of advance.
Well, no, wait a second. That must have been in 67, probably.
67, excuse me, 67,
yes.
right, getting
Yeah.
ready for
Yeah.
68.
Yeah.
And so I met Nelson Rockefeller, I met Barry Goldwater through that, and I
Right.
stayed for a weekend with Winthrop Rockefeller at his ranch at Windrock. Oh my
wow.
goodness.
Yeah.
It confirmed the
In
rich are
Arkansas.
different.
In
The
Arkansas.
rich are different.
Yes.
Wow. Amazing.
So you were part of the Romney Exploratory Committee.
Yep.
Tell me, in your opinion, why did that campaign abort? Was it simply the Lou Gordon show and the brainwashing remark?
It was part of it,
or
but
would it have happened otherwise?
Well, but let me. Here's something about George Romney that I don't think too many people realize. George Romney did not really hunger and thirst after being president of the United States. His goal was to be one of the Council of 12 of the Mormon Church. His faith meant so much more to him than anything in politics ever did. That's what makes him even more remarkable when it came to the issue of when he was governor and the issue of legislation relating to alcohol. he would not sign it, but he wouldn't veto it. It would become law without his signature. I thought that was he said, I am not going to impose my religious beliefs on the people of Michigan through a secular office. He was a very decent, honorable person, as was Bill Milliken.
So you thought these traits worked against him somewhat when he ran for president?
Yes. Now, people were very careful. They all understood, we explained in advance, please do not serve any alcoholic beverage to George or Lenore Romney. One time, in fact, at the Winthrop Rockefeller, they served Lenore a Bloody Mary, and she didn't want to offend anyone, so she snuck away. Peter, take care of this. Well, of course, I was an old-fashioned Methodist. I'm an abstainer also, so I had to quietly pour it into a potted plant that was nearby. So a lot of fun.
But so there was some of the hurly-burly and rough and tumble of national presidential politics that the Romneys just didn't quite fit into.
Right, correct.
Okay.
And George Romney, I spent a lot of time with him after all of that was over, after he was governor and everything, after he was sort of retired from active public life, and he had not one syllable of regret because he was still involved with the Mormon Church, and that was so important to him.
And of course, you knew both Mitt Romney and George Scott Romney.
Right.
Now a member of the MSU Board of Trustees growing up. What did you think at the time? Did you think that they would become...
They were nice kids. The Romneys had nice kids. They really did. And they were all so genuine. Mitt Romney was I knew him as a 14-year-old kid, and then I saw their family movies, and as he was raising his kids and his wife and everything. Nice people.
Did George Romney do the citizens of Michigan a real service, spearheading the Con and the new
Absolutely.
Constitution?
It brought us into the 20th century.
You think, in other words, it was a real plus to have
Oh,
the new
was it ever? Was it ever?
Yeah.
Where would we be today without that? And George Romney was the one person at that time who could be the catalyst to bring that about.
Thinking about that period in the late 50s into the early 60s, remember they'd made several attempts to hold a new Con, and they'd fallen short before George Romney founded Citizens for Michigan, and they finally got it going. Do you feel we've reached that point again today, or is the climate not quite the same as urgent as it was in '59 to have a new Con?
I believe that the question is going to be on the ballot, isn't it?
In 2010.
Yes. And there are a couple of things, for example, get rid of the election of judges, get the big three university boards appointed rather than elected. There are a few things like that. But is there enough to open up that whole? And I'm unconvinced yet. I'm going to have to do a lot more. Let's see what the climate is.
What about this huge sweeping proposal that they tried to get on the ballot this year?
That was
Reform Michigan government now.
That was just...
Well, but that really would have changed almost everything.
But it was such a polyglot mix, Bill. There was no particular coordination to it. And you need a lot of simplified coordination. Constitutions are very important documents that have to be simple, straightforward. Don't put a lot of clutter in it, but they want a lot of clutter.
Let's go back to the early 1960s. Richard Nixon, maybe running against John Kennedy in 1960 for president or sometime after that. Did you ever meet him?
I spent some time with him, and he was a very unusual personality. You could almost feel when he would walk into a room, there was a certain tension to Nixon. It was almost as though he were on stage, and he was concerned about how he was presenting himself. He had a certain insecurity about him, and yet he wasn't that he didn't seem that venal or invidious in person. And I had the pleasure of I introduced him a couple of times at various functions, and one time he left some notes behind on a speech. Of course, Jerry Rowe grabbed those for his collection, but
but you mean thank you notes or something?
No, he had notes on what he was going to say.
Oh, what he was going to say.
Right.
Okay.
But he didn't have a text or anything. He just had these notes.
Yeah.
And therefore, I found Nixon a very intriguing. He was the only one who could have gotten away with that China initiative because of his anti-communism thing. So he did some good, but then he had to obscure it all in that it was such a dilemma that he created for himself. And how many times have prominent people self-destructed through their own stupidity? It's so sad.
Even though he was a Democrat, what about John F. Kennedy? Did you ever have any interaction with him at all in connection with either the 1960 campaign or any time later?
Now we have an intriguing connection with the Kennedy assassination right here in Ypsilanti.
Okay.
Remember, the car he was riding in was leased from the Ford Motor Company. And our automobile museum here in Ypsilanti has the copy of that lease. And the afternoon that all happened, the car was immediately flown back to Willow Run. And so a friend of mine was on duty there from the Ford Motor Company to receive it and so on. And the minute they wheeled it into the hangar, it had all the blood and guts in the back seat, it had the flags, it had everything, just the way it left the parade route. And they noticed that people were trying to sneak up and trying to steal things, so I put immediate guard on it. And the next morning, they drove it down, right down I-94. Nobody realized what it was. Early in the morning, drove it down to 94 to the Ford Motor Company, get it completely reconditioned and returned to service. And they noticed that the 2 presidential custom-made blankets that were in the panels of the back seat were stolen. They were missing.
Oh my
So
God.
they disappeared here somewhere in Ypsilanti. We've offered rewards. One. No questions asked, anything, you know.
But
we've
you never
been able to
found
recover.
somebody.
About 50 years from now, they're going to appear on eBay someday, and somebody's going to get rich. But
They get rich right now.
oh boy.
Yeah.
But Kennedy was an interesting personality. But what I'm afraid was that the problem was the Kennedys were, again, the super rich, and money does have a certain peculiar. I don't want to call it corruption because it doesn't mean they're corrupt, but it does somehow distort. I guess distort is the word on what it is that the public interest is all about, and therefore ego and tradition and heritage and everything get mixed up in it.
What about 1964? You were working to re-elect George Romney, but at the same time, you had Republican Barry Goldwater running against LBJ for the presidency. What happened at that time?
We were told by all the inside experts, if LBJ carries Michigan by the million that they were projecting, George Romney cannot survive.
Right.
So that night we were posted to key precincts. And I was posted to one right here at the Woodruff School in Ypsilanti. It was a blue-collar area and so on and so forth. And the minute they opened up the back of that election machine, I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it. LBJ wins big. George Romney wins big. The ticket splitting was unbelievable.
It was believable.
And guess what? That's exactly. I called it in to Steve Stockmeyer. I called it to Central. I said, Steve, you're not going to believe these numbers. And I read them off to him. He said, Peter, we're getting this from all over. We knew by 8:30 that Romney was going to pull a huge upset. And that was the big kickoff for his 66.
Right. Well, wasn't there a concerted effort, though, on the part of the Romney campaign and a lot of Republicans in 64 to persuade voters that you can split your ticket?
Oh,
and
sure.
That George Romney
sure.
is not Barry Goldwater.
Nope.
And
no.
you can vote for Romney and you can vote for Goldwater.
Our campaign here in Ypsilanti, which was sort of a Democratic leaning area, we made it very clear he's a Republican. We're not trying to kid anybody.
Yeah.
But he had also done just in his first 2 years, he'd done so much to turn around our state, there was no reason to fire him.
Well, on the other hand, though, the man he was running against was Neil Stabler, who was from Ann Arbor. He was another Washtenaw County guy.
But poor Neil Stabler. He was the perfect example of what we talked about earlier. He was a great political operative. He never should be a candidate. I mean, I'm sorry, he just didn't.
He had been state Democratic chairman all during the 50s, and he'd been elected to a single term in Congress at large in 1962. You must have known him pretty well.
Oh, sure, I did. I had a great respect for him.
Why was he somebody who couldn't project himself well as a public official?
Because he just didn't have the persona of a friendly, outgoing. He was too much the technician, too much, and he had, I'm sorry, but he had that silly mustache that he wore. It just didn't help his persona at all.
Yeah. Okay, so Goldwater, did you have any interaction with Goldwater at all? Were you at a rally where he spoke in Michigan? What was your impression of Barry Goldwater?
Barry Goldwater was the quintessential ideologue, and he just didn't have enough flexibility. If he'd had a little bit more flexibility, he might have made it a closer race. But Barry, and he had these hard, oh my goodness. In some respects, he was not well served by his supporters because they were a little too kooky. They would, oh my goodness, they would come to conventions and everything all decked out in this paraphernalia and everything.
Well,
they didn't help.
Let me ask you this, though. One of the ironies about Barry Goldwater is, in his later years, he actually was viewed by a lot of people in Arizona as kind of an apostate who had drifted away from core values of the Republican Party. He was actually, well, you could actually make a case that he'd never really changed that much. He was always a libertarian. Those social, cultural issues were not viable issues in the 60s. He didn't have to talk about it.
But he waited around long enough.
Right, he waited around, and so he actually ended up looking fairly moderate.
Right.
Meanwhile, George Romney was a Mormon, and there were a lot of things at the end that, George Romney wasn't too happy about, and he began to look more conservative. They almost reversed roles.
Right. But the passage of time does some peculiar things in politics. It really does.
So Barry Goldwater was just kind of the wrong man at the wrong time.
Yep, but he became the right man at the right time as far as public acceptance and public understanding.
Right. And he was actually leading the delegation of Republican senators who went to see Nixon.
And I saw him, right, and I saw him.
You have to resign.
I saw him there when we were doing the Romney travels, and we met out there. And Barry Goldwater was gracious, and he had no bitterness. He was a very decent person deep down. He really was.
Okay, what about Gerald Ford?
Gerald Ford, of course, was
saved his bacon. Was he grateful?
Well,
did he ever say anything to you?
Oh,
did he? Jerry didn't know about it.
No, but Jerry Ford was a very decent person, and this country made a huge mistake in throwing him out. Jerry Ford, but the thing that impressed me so about Jerry Ford was that the higher up he moved in the political ladder, the more laid back he was. He was so unimpressed by the fuss and feathers. And trust me, what we have created, the American presidency, would corrupt any normal mortal. I mean, the bowing and scraping, he was totally unaffected by that. And Jerry Ford was a good, decent person and had all the right values. And but he wasn't dynamic. He wasn't a pound on the table, give a stem winding speech. But he was such a good, basic person. He really was.
What about the Republican national chairman in the early and mid 1970s? Both of them ended up running for president, George H.W. Bush and Bob Dole. Was your experience with either of those men at that time? I know that's a huge question, but let's just
start with George H.W. Bush. There is one very decent, honorable person. He really is. And I've known him through my surrogate son, Tim McBride, who is his personal aide, and he has told me all kinds of remarkable things about George H.W., a very humane, understanding. He was not corrupted by power. He was not corrupted by wealth. Very unusual. And again, it's sad that we've lost his services to the country.
What about Bob Dole?
Bob Dole was a very interesting, outgoing, political, the backslapper type and everything, but he didn't quite have the gravitas, or whatever word you want to use, for being in that Oval Office. And I think he had trouble conveying that to the people, that I could really do that as your president.
How about national Republican chairmen over the years that you've known? In particular, obviously you knew Bill Brock.
I think that generally speaking, we do a pretty good job in both parties. In both parties, they've got to come up through a lot of tests and a lot of trials to get to be a national chairman. And I think the party mechanism does a pretty good job. And remember, the political parties are responsible for the conventions, everything the convention, but every convention, every 4 years, is its own creation. And therefore, there's a lot of responsibility. And they know there's a lot of responsibility, and good people come into those positions, generally speaking.
Was Brock a pretty good chairman?
Oh, yes. He was quite reluctant about the Detroit thing, and yet, boy, after it was over, he heaped praise on it. He said, you really did a job.
What about the state Republican chairman here? When you came in, probably Art Elliott was the chairman.
He sure was.
Ellie Peterson, Bill McLaughlin.
All good, all
these
very good people. Ellie Peterson was a real trailblazer because woman, but understood politics, and she was smart enough to have a very strong team around her in Bill McLaughlin and Joyce Braithwaite. And they were all good political operatives and absolutely straight arrows. Nothing corrupting, nothing, everything. That was excellent.
What about Bill Milliken, anyway?
William G. Milliken remains my all-time political hero because, not because he appointed me to 2 offices, which certainly didn't enhance his...
You're not sure you're grateful for
No.
Yes.
But Bill Milliken was, again, absolutely clean. He was a very kind of a low-key personality, but a high key in integrity and ethics, and there was no bending the rules. He was bipartisan. He could reach across the aisle. He could deal with Democrats, but he was a faithful Republican, but was often criticized for not being a tough enough Republican. But he knew the political climate he existed in. He had to be realistic about it, and he was, and he got a lot of great things done for this state. Just simple things like the bottle bill. He went against the Manufacturers Association and the so-called money interest because it was in the public interest to clean up the Michigan countryside, and he did, and therefore those were he's the best.
You think his greatest legacy is as an environmentalist?
That is certainly one of his, but I think his greatest legacy is setting a standard to which, as President Washington said, the wise and the just can repair. You can use Bill Milliken as a standard of excellence in public office forever.
What about John Engler?
John Engler was the quintessential politician. He was in politics when he was a student at MSU. He understood politics like virtually no one else. He was the political operative. And you need that, but John, every now and then, he'd have a little trouble compromising that and seeing to it that we've got to move beyond, and once you become governor, you've got to move beyond that. And he did to some respects. I mean, don't take anything away from him. But that's why he doesn't quite come up to the standard that I think Bill Milliken set.
And he didn't get along too well with not just the Governor Milliken personally, but some of the people around Governor Milliken very well.
And I had to play peacemaker on a few occasions. And, you know, blessed are the peacemakers, for they'll get a kick, they'll get a kick in the teeth.
Yes.
Well, I had to endure that.
What were the basic differences that they had? I mean,
I think the basic difference is that Bill Milliken was not a huge fan of partisan politics. He had just, you know, he grew up in it and everything. His dad had been, but he wasn't as ardent in it as John Engler was. And it was a question of degree more than outright difference.
What about Jim Brickley, who was Bill Milliken's lieutenant governor and later ran for governor, was a Supreme Court justice? What was your impression of Jim Brickley?
Jim Brickley was a good person, a very pleasant person, but Jim Brickley didn't have quite enough of the fire in the belly to be elected governor. He just didn't push it quite enough. He was a little bit, maybe lackadaisical is a wee bit extreme, but he just couldn't quite get that.
What about the man who upset Jim Brickley in the Republican primary in 1982, Dick Headley, and became the nominee to succeed Governor Milliken and lost to Jim Blanchard?
Right. Well, Headley was an ideologue, hard worker, cheerleader type. I mean, he could get out there and fire up a crowd and so on, but he was also too partisan, and that's what Blanchard beat him on.
Yeah, I mean, he was a Mormon too. Headley was, just like George Romney. He could give a great speech like George Romney. But what, was George Romney a little bit better at getting along with the other side and being nonpartisan?
And George Romney also did a better job of identifying a specific issue. Headley got on this, the Headley Amendment thing and so on. He got on that.
And some social issues like abortion, women's rights.
A little bit more of the ideologue than Romney was. So Romney was able to move beyond that to a more effective degree than Dick Headley was.
What about what some people might see as the conflict inherent in being a public official, whether elected or appointed? Do they do the bidding of the public that is their boss, so to speak, may put them in office? Or do they act as kind of a trustee, basically feeling, I'll just exercise my best judgment no matter what the emotions of the public may be on a particular issue?
It is a dreadful dilemma, and any honest public office holder should be able to recognize it and admit to it. And I have the perfect example. When I was the chairman of the State Highway Commission, we had the issue before us of the extension of M275 up through Oakland County. And the people up there fought it. There was a certain hardcore group, environmentalists, fought it because of the lakes, the wetlands and everything. Don't extend 275, even though the Federal Highway Administration said, oh, we're doing all these things to make, ameliorate those circumstances and so on. And the traffic, you're going to need it, or you're going to have a horrible traffic aneurysm up there. And finally, they beat upon us, these environmentalists, beat upon us. And finally, one day we said, okay, we're canceling M275. And it was the first time ever that any segment of the interstate system had been canceled anywhere in the country. In fact, I got a letter from Soapy Williams on that occasion. Said, you responded to the people, and that's so unusual for a state agency to do, and you did it, and I applaud it. And then but in later years, when I've tried to drive through Oakland County, I've said, we may have done what the people wanted, but the people were wrong. They didn't realize what they were creating, the law of unintended consequences. Therefore, did I do the right thing in responding to the people, or did I do the wrong thing because I ignored what the professionals were telling us we needed? And that is a continuing dilemma. And how do you solve it? We are supposed to represent the people. But do the people always know what's best for them? And when you start compromising that, though, well, wait a minute. If you start saying, well, I don't agree with the people on this, and I don't agree with the people on that, I'm not just certain that you should ever really forget what it is the people want. It's their money, and they live with the consequences. But future generations have to live with consequences that can endanger the public safety. It's 275.
Right. You've seen quite an evolution in the Republican Party and its philosophy over the years, beginning in the early to mid-30s up to the present day. How would you describe that evolution?
I would rather look at it from the standpoint of both parties. Okay. In my day and time, the two parties were fairly responsible, independent of the special interests, independent of the pullings and haulings, and they understood that we have three branches of government. We've got to elect responsible people to the legislature, we've got to elect responsible governors, then those mechanisms will produce the third branch. But today, we don't have three branches of government anymore. We don't have two strong political parties. We've got one overall entity, the lobbyists, with their money. And they're buying and selling votes every day in Washington
Special
and Lansing.
interests.
Oh, and they control the oxygen of politics, the money. Mm-hmm. And in the old days, the political parties raised the money, decided what candidates to support and what this and this. But nowadays, those decisions are all made in secret in certain political enclaves.
So that actually concerns you a lot more than, let's say, differences in ideology between the two parties and what they believe in.
Because the parties have been so emasculated. In the name of reform, we've cut down on the role of political parties. Big mistake, big mistake. And you know, they were after the smoke-filled rooms. You know, the smoke-filled rooms produced George Washington, John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, Abraham Lincoln, Theodore Roosevelt, all kinds of. But then we got rid of the smoke-filled rooms, and I'm afraid the results haven't quite measured up.
You think the presidential primary system is absolutely broken?
Oh, look at the chaos it creates. Look at the mischief it creates. I mean, and the money that it soaks up. Come on, it's a lobbyist paradise.
Well, you know, we've spent so much time talking about politics, and I'm going to wrap this up now and give you your freedom once again. But what about your private life? I mean, you have had, you know, food to put on the table, earn a living. Your father, founded a credit bureau?
Yep. I've been very fortunate. First of all, I had a loving family. My parents and my grandparents were wonderful examples. My grandfather, one time, when my uncle arrived home, he was 16, and my father was the president of the city council in Beloit, Wisconsin, and his son had been apprehended by the police for running a stop sign. He said, well, my father's the president of the city council. You can't write me. Drive on. So I was bragging at the dinner table that night. My grandfather said, you did what? What? Oh, yes. He said, come with me. He took him right down to the police station. My son broke the law, and you failed to write him a ticket. Write him that ticket. Wow. And that was a very valuable lesson for the whole family. And that's the way we grew up.
So they came from Beloit to here?
Yes, they retired to Michigan, in Chelsea, Michigan, small town. My grandfather was an engineer. In fact, he wrote the article for the Encyclopedia Britannica on windmills. That was his big specialty.
Wow.
And but that was a sort of integrity. And my father, 2 or 3 times, people came to him offering him money if he would doctor up a credit report. He wouldn't do it. He wouldn't do it.
He started the Credit Bureau in 1924.
Yep, here in Ypsilanti.
And so you succeeded him running it.
That's right.
And now it's what? The only
independently owned credit bureau left in the universe.
Wow. Now, why is that? How did you survive alone?
Because we established a certain niche, and we understand that there are local needs for local credit reports, local collection efforts, bad debts, and that's what we do. And we do rather well.
Has it been tough to balance over the years all your political activity and your service in these government agencies on the one hand, which you're doing almost kind of pro bono, while you're trying to run the credit agency on the other?
No, because I've had good people working for me. I've been very fortunate in that respect as well. And therefore, and the only occasion, way back, I used to get a few accounts through another agency to collect delinquent tuition at MSU. And the minute I was appointed to the MSU board, I canceled all that, made sure that I never got any more of that. So that rare occasion, there might have been a compromise that I want the standard of Caesar's wife to look pallid compared to the standard I wish to apply.
I think that's a good way to end this, and it's been a great pleasure to have this time with you, Peter B. Fletcher. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Pleasure.